Ridgewood High, a place of learning, a place of laughter, a place of fear. The old building stood with a stoic silence. It had seen generations pass through its halls, each one leaving their mark, some good, some not. The air itself felt heavy, like a secret whispered too many times. Students hurried through the corridors, their voices hushed, their eyes darting to the shadows. There were stories. Whispered tales passed down like heirlooms, stories of Ridgewood's past, stories that sent shivers down your spine. They spoke of cold spots and strange noises, unexplained events that defied logic. But one story stood out, the story of room 302. It was more than just a classroom. It was a warning, a place where the veil between reality and something else felt thin. Students spoke of a presence there, a feeling of being watched, a coldness that clung to you long after you left. The rumors stretched back decades, to a time when Ridgewood was new, when its bricks shone bright and its floors gleamed. Back then, room 302 was like any other, filled with the murmur of students and the scratch of chalk on a board. But something happened, something dark. A teacher disappeared, vanished without a trace. Last seen entering room 302. The police investigated. No clues, no suspects, no answers. The case went cold, but the mystery remained, a stain on the soul of Ridgewood High. Over the years, the stories grew. The missing teacher became a ghost, a spectre haunting the room where they were last seen. Students reported strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, lights flickering, whispers carried on the wind. Now, the door to room 302 stood at the end of a long, empty corridor, its paint peeling, the nameplate gone, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. Most students avoided it, their steps quickening as they passed. A wide berth maintained, but some were drawn to it, curiosity battling with fear. They felt the pull of the unknown, the allure of the forbidden. They would stand outside, listening, hoping for a glimpse into the darkness that lay beyond. Among them were 4 friends, bound by a shared fascination with the paranormal. They saw the stories as a challenge, a puzzle to be solved. They were determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting of room 302. Little did they know, their curiosity was about to awaken something sinister. The leader was Jake, a lanky boy with a thirst for adventure. He devoured ghost stories like candy, his mind always searching for the logical explanation behind the unexplainable. Next was Emily, sharp-witted and skeptical. She refused to believe anything without concrete proof, but a flicker of fear always danced in her eyes. Then came Ben, the quiet one. He carried a worn notebook filled with local legends and ghost stories. Ben believed in the unseen world. His eyes, always watchful, seemed to see things others missed. And finally, there was Chloe, the sensitive one. She felt drawn to the supernatural, a sixth sense always tingling. Chloe believed in the power of spirits, both good and evil. They stood before the infamous room 302, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hallway. A chill hung in the air despite the warmth of the day. "Are you sure about this?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the silence. "Relax, Em," Jake said, his tone nonchalant, but his eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. "It's just an empty room, probably filled with cobwebs and old textbooks." Ben, ever silent, simply nodded in agreement, his gaze fixed on the door. Chloe, however, shivered. "I don't like it," she murmured, rubbing her arms. "It feels cold." Ignoring her unease, Jake took a deep breath and reached for the doorknob. The metal felt icy against his skin like a jolt of electricity. He hesitated for a moment. Then, with a determined push, he opened the door. The air inside was thick and stale, heavy with the weight of forgotten years. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the grime-covered windows. The room was bare, except for a single dusty chair sitting in the middle of the room. It faced a chalkboard, scratched with faded equations and forgotten lessons. Silence pressed in on them, the kind of silence that felt alive, listening. Jake coughed, breaking the spell. "See? Just as I thought," he said, trying to sound casual. Nothing to be scared of. But his words lacked conviction. They all felt it. The atmosphere was different here, charged with an unseen energy. Emily stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. "It's strange," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the stillness. "It feels colder in here." As if on cue, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut with a resounding bang. They all jumped. Chloe gasped, clutching at Ben's arm. "What was that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Jake rushed to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut. "It's stuck," he said, his voice strained. He rattled the doorknob again, but to no avail. "Don't worry," Ben said, his voice calm despite the situation. "There's probably something blocking it." But even as he spoke, a shiver ran down his spine. Something about this didn't feel right. Suddenly, Chloe let out a sharp cry. "What is it, Chloe?" Emily asked, rushing to her side. Chloe pointed a trembling finger towards the chalkboard. The dusty surface was now marred by a single word. Scrawled in what looked like chalk, but darker, more sinister, was the word leave. The handwriting was jagged, as if written in a hurry. As they stared at the word, a cold breath seemed to pass over them, extinguishing the last of their bravado. They were no longer alone in room 302. Something was with them, and it wanted them out, now. Panic welled up in Jake's chest. This was no joke, no prank. Something was terribly wrong. He pushed against the door with all his might. It wouldn't budge. "It's no use," Emily said, her voice trembling. "We're locked in." Ben, his eyes darting around the room, pulled out his phone. "No signal," he muttered. "We're on our own." Chloe stood frozen in place, her eyes fixed on the chalkboard. The word leave seemed to vibrate with an evil energy. "We need to get out of here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The air grew colder, a palpable chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It felt like an unseen presence was closing in on them. A low hum began to fill the room. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but it grew steadily louder. A mournful, chilling sound that seemed to seep into their bones. And then, from the darkness at the back of the room, a voice whispered their names. "Jake, Emily, Ben, Chloe." The voice was soft, raspy, ancient. It sent shivers down their spines. Emily gasped. Ben stumbled backward, bumping into Chloe. Jake stood his ground. His heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to show fear. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. The humming intensified. The voice whispered again, closer this time. "Leave, while you still can." Then, in the blink of an eye, a figure materialized before them. A woman, translucent, her form shimmering like heat haze. She wore a long, flowing dress. Her face was pale. Her eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to pierce their souls. Chloe screamed. Emily covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a cry. Ben's notebook slipped from his grasp. He stared at the ghostly apparition, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. The woman drifted towards them, her feet not touching the ground. "This is my domain," she whispered, her voice a mournful sigh. "You should not have come here." Jake, His initial fear, replaced by a surge of adrenaline, sprang into action. He raced to the windows. They were nailed shut. He rattled the handles, pounded on the glass, but they wouldn't budge. "We're trapped," he shouted, his voice laced with panic. The ghostly woman glided closer, her ethereal form seeming to block out the light from the hallway. "Let us go!" Emily screamed at the apparition. "We didn't mean any harm!" But the ghost continued to drift towards them, her sorrowful eyes fixed on Chloe. You feel it, don't you?" the ghost whispered, her voice now directed solely at Chloe. "The veil is thin for you." Chloe trembled. She felt a strange connection to the ghostly woman, as if their spirits were somehow intertwined. The ghost reached out a translucent hand. Her touch sent a jolt of icy energy through Chloe's body. Images flashed through Chloe's mind, visions of the past. She saw the ghost as a living woman, standing before a classroom full of students. Her name was Miss Eleanor Vance. Chloe saw Miss Vance's dedication to her students, her passion for teaching, and then she saw the betrayal. A jealous colleague, a false accusation, and finally Miss Vance's disappearance, vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and rumors. The visions faded. Chloe stumbled backward, her mind reeling from the onslaught of images. She was a teacher here, Chloe stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She was falsely accused, and then she disappeared. The ghost, Miss Vance, nodded sadly. "My soul is bound to this place," she whispered, trapped by injustice. Suddenly a noise from the hallway made them all jump, a thud, followed by the sound of footsteps. Someone was coming, but was it friend or foe? The ghostly apparition of Miss Vance turned towards the door, her eyes narrowed. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice filled with urgency. "Not all who wander these halls are what they seem." The footsteps grew louder, closer. They echoed in the silent hallway. Hope flickered in Jake's chest. Could it be a teacher, a security guard, someone who could help them escape this nightmare? He rushed to the door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He hesitated. Miss Vance's warning echoed in his mind. Not all who wander these halls are what they seem. He glanced back at his friends. They huddled together in the center of the room, their faces pale and drawn in the dim light. Chloe still seemed shaken from her encounter with Miss Vance, her eyes wide and unseeing. Ben clutched his notebook to his chest, his gaze fixed on the ghostly figure. Only Emily seemed to share Jake's cautious optimism. A flicker of hope danced in her eyes. The doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay on the other side. He threw open the door. A gasp escaped his lips. Standing in the hallway was not a teacher, not a security guard, but a solitary figure, old and stooped, his face obscured by the shadows of a worn baseball cap. The figure looked up. His eyes, two dark, piercing points, seemed to bore into Jake's soul. A chill ran down Jake's spine. He knew instinctively that this was no ordinary man. This was something else. Something ancient, something dangerous. "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "They call me Old Tom," he croaked. "Janitor of this here school, been here since the beginning." He stepped into the room. His presence seemed to suck the air from their lungs. The air grew colder, heavier. "You shouldn't be here," Old Tom said, his gaze sweeping over the four friends. "This room, it ain't safe." He shuffled towards the chalkboard, his eyes fixed on the ghostly figure of Miss Vance. She's been waiting a long time, waiting for someone to hear her story. "Her story?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you mean?" Old Tom turned to face them, His eyes, now visible beneath the brim of his cap, glinted with an eerie light. Eleanor Vance. A good woman, a dedicated teacher. He shook his head sadly. Falsely accused, betrayed by those she trusted. I promised her I'd help her find peace, old Tom continued, his voice raspy with emotion. But some wounds, they run too deep. He turned back to Miss Vance, his gaze filled with sorrow. I've tried, Eleanor. Lord knows I've tried, but the anger, the pain, it keeps her tethered here. Miss Vance's translucent form flickered, as if a gust of wind might extinguish her. Her voice, when she spoke, was filled with a deep, abiding sadness. I cannot rest, she whispered. Not until the truth is revealed, until my name is cleared. She turned towards Chloe, her eyes locking with hers. You can help me, she pleaded. You can tell my story. Chloe stared back at Miss Vance, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a surge of sympathy for the ghostly teacher, a sense of responsibility to help her find peace. But fear warred with compassion within her. Could she really do this? Could she face the truth of what happened all those years ago? Old Tom placed a hand on Chloe's shoulder. His touch, surprisingly gentle, sent a shiver down her spine. Don't be afraid, child, he whispered. Eleanor means you no harm. He needs your help. He leaned closer. His breath, cold and stale, tickled her ear. The truth lies hidden, buried deep within these walls. Seek out the one they called the Raven, old Tom whispered, his voice barely audible above the sudden humming that filled the room. He knows the truth of Eleanor's fate. The humming intensified. The air crackled with energy. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, old Tom vanished. Leaving the four friends alone once more with the ghostly Miss Vance and the weight of a name whispered on the wind. The Raven. The room felt heavier now, the air thick with Miss Vance's sorrow and the mystery of the Raven. Jake broke the silence, his voice tight. The Raven, who is that? Emily, her skepticism momentarily forgotten, flipped through Ben's worn notebook. Maybe it's a clue, she muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. A symbol, a nickname. Chloe, still shaken but resolute, touched her temple, the ghostly images lingering. I feel like I should know, she whispered, like the name is on the tip of my tongue. Ben, his gaze distant, finally spoke, his voice hushed. The Raven. I think I've read something about that. He flipped through his own collection of local history pamphlets. Years ago there was a teacher, known for his love of Edgar Allan Poe. They say he was obsessed with the macabre. A teacher obsessed with the macabre, Jake echoed, a shiver running down his spine. Sounds promising. The weight of their situation pressed down on them. They were trapped in a haunted room, tasked with solving a decades-old mystery, guided by whispers and shadows. But how do we find him? Emily asked, her practical side reasserting itself. If he knows the truth about Miss Vance, he could be the key to helping her find peace and us to escape this room. The library, Chloe said suddenly, her voice firm. Miss Vance showed me a glimpse of her past. She loved books. She spent hours in the library. If this Raven was a fellow teacher, maybe they knew each other. Maybe he left something behind. A shared sense of purpose settled over them. For the first time since entering room 302, they had a lead. They had to get to the library. Leaving room 302, even with the ghostly Miss Vance floating beside them, felt like stepping into the unknown. The hallway, once familiar, now seemed menacing in the fading light. The library's doors loomed before them, massive and imposing. Chloe pushed them open, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of decaying paper. Just as they were about to admit defeat, Ben stumbled upon a loose brick in the wall. It dislodged, revealing a small, dark opening. A musty, stale smell wafted from the opening, sending shivers down their spines. "What is it?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her own heart. Chloe, ever sensitive to the unseen world, felt a cold spot settle over her. "It's him!" she breathed, her eyes wide. "The Raven. I can feel his presence here." Jake, never one to back down from a challenge, grabbed a flashlight from his backpack and shone it into the darkness. The beam revealed a narrow passage, barely wide enough to squeeze through. "Looks like a secret room," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. "Maybe even the Raven's secret hiding place." One by one, they slipped through the opening, Miss Vance's ghostly form gliding effortlessly beside them. The passage opened into a small, dusty chamber, lit only by the faint glow of Jake's flashlight. The air was thick with the weight of forgotten secrets. Books and papers were piled haphazardly on a rickety table, their pages yellowed and brittle with age. And then they saw it. Nailed to the wall, barely visible in the dim light, was a framed photograph of a man. He was tall and thin, with sharp features and piercing dark eyes. A raven feather, black as midnight, was tucked behind his ear. This was the Raven. Beneath the photo, scrawled in a frantic hand, was a message. "Eleanor was right," it read. "They wouldn't listen. They wouldn't believe her. They covered it up to protect their own. But I know the truth. I saw what they did to her. I saw..." The message ended abruptly. The rest of the page had been ripped away, leaving only a jagged edge and a chilling silence in its wake. The Raven knew what happened to Miss Vance. He tried to tell the world, but someone silenced him, and now the truth rested in their hands. The Raven's words, though incomplete, hung heavy in the air. They confirmed what Chloe had seen. Miss Vance was the victim, not a perpetrator. But the mystery deepened. What did they do to silence Miss Vance and the Raven? And what truth was so terrible that it needed to be buried? Emily picked up a scattered journal. The leather cover was cracked and faded, but the pages inside were filled with elegant cursive handwriting. "It's the Raven's diary," she breathed. "Maybe we can find some answers here." Through Mr. Hawthorne's fragmented entries, they pieced together the events leading to Miss Vance's disappearance. A valuable antique, donated by a wealthy benefactor, had gone missing from the school vault. Accusations flew, whispers turned into open accusations, and fingers pointed at Miss Vance. She had been the last one to see the antique, having used it for a history lesson just days before its disappearance. Mr. Hawthorne, convinced of his friend's innocence, had dug deeper. His investigation led him to a network of lies and deceit, implicating the school's then principal, a man obsessed with maintaining the school's pristine reputation, no matter the cost. He discovered that the principal had secretly sold the antique to settle a gambling debt, pinning the blame on Miss Vance to cover his tracks. A cold fury filled the air around Miss Vance's ghostly form as the students uncovered the truth. She had been betrayed by the very people entrusted with her well-being. Her reputation tarnished, her life's work destroyed by a web of lies. "He took everything from me," she whispered, her voice a mournful echo in the cramped space. "My purpose, my dignity, my freedom." Mr. Hawthorne's diary ended abruptly. The last entry spoke of a confrontation with the principal. He had threatened to expose the truth, to clear Miss Vance's name. But someone had silenced him before he could. "There's one last place we haven't looked," Ben said, his voice hushed. He had been studying the blueprints of the school, found tucked away in a dusty corner of the Raven's hideout. There's a hidden room, a panic room, built into the principal's old office. It's not on any of the official plans. The panic room was a time capsule of the past. Cobwebs clung to the walls, dust covered the old furniture, and a single flickering light bulb cast long, eerie shadows. And there in the center sat an old rotary telephone, its cord frayed and severed. Miss Vance's translucent form shimmered, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "He trapped Mr. Hawthorne here," she whispered, her voice thick with anger. Chloe felt a wave of Miss Vance's rage wash over her, but Chloe also sensed the lingering pain, the desperate need for peace beneath the anger. The air crackled with a palpable energy. Miss Vance's ghostly form wavered, her spectral hand hovering near the antique. Chloe understood. This wasn't just about the object, it was about the truth it represented. The truth that could destroy the legacy of the corrupt principal even now, years after his death. But Chloe also felt the pull of peace, the yearning for rest that emanated from the ghostly teacher. "Miss Vance," Chloe spoke softly, her voice echoing in the small, dusty room. "Exposing him now, it won't change the past. It won't ease your pain." She stepped closer, her gaze meeting the spectral eyes of the ghost. "Let it go. Find peace." The silence stretched, thick with unspoken emotions. The antique seemed to pulse with a faint light, reflecting the turmoil of Miss Vance's spirit. Then slowly, the ghostly hand withdrew. The air grew lighter, the oppressive weight of anger and despair lifting. A soft, sad smile touched Miss Vance's translucent features. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a gentle breeze. "You helped me find my way." She turned, her form beginning to fade, her gaze lingering on the 4 friends who had inadvertently brought her peace. "This school, it holds many secrets. Be careful what you seek, for some truths are best left undisturbed." And then, with a final sigh, like a gust of wind through autumn leaves, Miss Vance was gone. The antique, once a symbol of betrayal and loss, now sat inert, its power seemingly diminished. The truth had been revealed, not through vengeance but through compassion and understanding. The 4 friends left the panic room, the weight of the school's secrets heavy on their hearts. They emerged into the hallway, the silence now deafening after the echoes of the past. The air felt different, cleansed somehow, but the feeling of being watched, of unseen presences lingering in the shadows, remained. Ridgewood High had not given up all its secrets that night. Questions lingered, whispers of untold stories echoing in the empty corridors. What had happened to the Raven? Had he perished in the panic room, silenced by the principal's deceit? Or had he escaped, only to vanish into the night, taking the full truth of Miss Vance's story with him? As they walked away, the setting sun casting long, eerie shadows, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had been forever changed. They had stared into the face of fear, confronted the darkness beneath their seemingly ordinary school. They had touched the unseen world, and it had touched them back, leaving an indelible mark on their souls. The memory of Miss Vance, once a vengeful spirit, now rested peacefully in their minds. A reminder that even in the darkest places, compassion could triumph over anger and despair. But the haunting of Ridgewood High, the lingering presence of untold stories, would forever remain, a chilling whisper in the halls of their memories.